Thank you for tuning in to All Things Real Estate. Once again, here are your hosts, Brad Avergon and Gary Kelly.
Back to All Things Real Estate. I'm Gary Kelly with Cassidy Real Estate, and Brad Avergon is still with Fairway Mortgage. Nothing's changed in the last couple of minutes, right, Brad?
That's right.
So you were asking about the loan that the people ended up doing. So they had gone down the path of a conventional loan, and the appraiser picked up on some of the holes in walls. There were some issues with the deck where a board was spongy. Not a disaster, but certainly from a safety perspective, you'd want to have it addressed. We had the sellers had done, the actual bank had done an inspection. Now, that doesn't mean a traditional home inspection. That meant that they had an electrician come out, and the electrician looked at the systems of the house and said, yep, they seem to work. They had someone come out and they ran the well, so they knew that the well would spit out water, but they didn't do a water quality test. So that was something that had to be done. There were some oddities. For some reason, the prior owners had taken baseboard heating and had disconnected it and had run it through the ductwork of the house, presumably to provide additional heat to a zone of the house. That was something that the appraiser saw, thought that someone had stolen copper. Well, actually, we found out later it was just that they were trying to do this rerouting of heat. And so that was something that had to be fixed. So at the end of the story for that particular client, they switched to a renovation loan so that they had the money to take care of that, which I think in the end they will look at as a godsend.
Yeah, so let me comment on a couple of those points that you brought up, because I think it's a great illustration of foreclosure properties and something that anybody that's considering purchasing them really needs to kind of go in with the eyes wide open. So a property that's been foreclosed upon by the bank, oftentimes what the bank will do is, especially as we head into 2024 here, they will winterize the property. Why do they do that? Because they don't want to have to pay for the utilities. The bank's already on the hook. They may have to sell it at a loss. They don't know, or we don't know at this point. But they don't want to have to maintain the property. And so oftentimes what they'll do is they will winterize it, meaning they shut the utilities off. They'll drain the pipes if it's forced hot water. They'll pay a plumber to come in and drain the pipes if that's the case. They'll drain the toilets. They'll shut the electricity off so the house can sit without pipes bursting and things like that. When a bank goes in for conventional financing, all the utilities have to be on. That's one of the things the appraisers check. And if the utilities are not on, you can't get conventional financing. Even if they look good, you can't get conventional financing. So sometimes when somebody puts something under agreement, under a foreclosure, they say, well, the bank wants me to have the seller, who is now the bank, turn the utilities on. The bank's not going to pay for that. And so that's an extra cost that the buyer may have to bear if the bank is willing to let them turn it on and, again, winterize it if need be. Right. So there's a lot of things that are going on there. The other thing is, because the utilities are not turned on, you can't check those things. So in addition to walking in and seeing the obvious things like holes in the wall, things like that, there's the non-obvious. So I guess what I'm saying is, anybody thinking about purchasing a foreclosure property really should be talking to a lender about a renovation loan, because the likelihood is greater than, I would say, 95% that you're going to need one. There's something that's off. In the case of, especially like, for example, if we're talking about a house that's on a septic system, well, in Massachusetts, we need a certificate called a Title V, which is basically a septic compliance certificate saying the septic is working. Bank is not going to necessarily pay for that on a foreclosure. They're already, as I said, maybe upside down on the property. They want to incur as little cost as possible. And so you may need to prepare for those additional costs in addition to the cosmetic things.
Right. I remember selling a sheriff sale house. This was a house where the gentleman was going to the big house and not needing his large house anymore, and the sheriff's department took it over, and they went through and had it winterized. But as we were selling it, we had sold it as is, but the buyer wanted the utilities turned on, and for some reason, the marshal service agreed that they could turn on the utilities. Um, and then they found there were half a dozen split pipes in the walls. Okay, nothing that was, nothing that you wouldn't expect for a large house that had, been sitting there in the wintertime, but it was still an expense. Uh, it's almost inevitable. What if you have a house with tenants in it, Brad?
So that's a great question, Gary, and one again you want to go into it with your eyes open. So sometimes what will happen is, the cases we've talked about so far, the foreclosures in the case of an owner occupied property, a property in which the people that own it are living in the property, and again that can be very sad. But sometimes what will happen is you'll have a landlord, a person who bought a property as an investment property, and for whatever reason the tenants have stopped paying them. And then, if the landlord does not have the wherewithal to be able to make those mortgage payments and get those tenants out of there, they will let that property go into foreclosure. Unfortunately, what happens then is when that property is sold, the tenants can still be in the property, and getting them out of that property can be very, very challenging, both from a technical standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint. Because what the new buyer will have to do is hire an attorney to get them to take it to court, and the housing court, which is a special court having to do with tenant law, and to try to get them removed from the property. I will tell you that in my experience, most often the laws are on the side of the tenants, not on the side of the landlord, even though the landlord can be 100% right. The laws in Massachusetts tend to favor them, and as a result, um, a lot of times, not only do the landlords have to pay for the buyers have to pay for the cost of the attorney, but they often have to pay the buyers sometimes to get out of the property. They call that cash for keys.
Cash for keys.
Yeah. And so this is, I guess it's buying a foreclosure is not for the lighthearted, so to speak. You really need to have the right team around you, including someone like yourself, Gary, who has some experience with that, someone like myself that's worked with those. But also a key player in this is the attorney. You need not just a conveyancing attorney, who is somebody. Conveyancing would be, when you buy and sell real estate, but somebody that specializes in landlord and tenant law. Because if it is not owner occupied, you really need to have your legal team, and your buying team on top notch. This is not a matter of let's go online, find a lender, find a real. This is, you really need to have your ducks in a row, because you can lose a lot of money.
I was selling a house that had tenants in it, and it turned out that one of the owners, his mother lived in the house, which was odd. That, you've got a property where your mom's living and you're letting it get foreclosed on. The sad thing in all that is the bank comes up, they set up a little portable, podium. They go through the process of reading what they're going to do. Are there any objections? No. Done. And it was that quick, that fast. It took minutes. And then in this particular case, the couple of tenants had found their own way to another place, and the mother, the health and human services people were actually there at the time, and were able to immediately offer some assistance, which made me feel good. And then the building went its way. It's not. I know that if you're buying a foreclosure, you want to be there and see the gavel come down and all that stuff. But it's hard for the people that are in there. And it's, you got to remember, anyone that bought a house, they had a dream. And that dream has evaporated somewhere along the line, and it's not a pleasant thing to go through.
Yeah, and one more thing, we mentioned tenants before. I want to sometimes what happens is the landlord is having their own personal issues, the owner of the property, and the tenants may in fact be paying their rent to the landlord, but the landlord realizes he's going down, and rather than make that mortgage payment, he'll keep the rent that the tenants are paying him, not make the mortgage payment, and all of a sudden the tenants find out that the property is in foreclosure. And you mentioned that moment where they put the podium outside and the gavel goes down. They're often caught by surprise because they've been paying their rent on time. So it's a very sad moment, no matter how you slice it, whether it's an owner occupant or tenants sometimes that are in there. It's a very, very sad moment. The other thing to be cautious of is timelines. This is not a standard purchase transaction that you're going to close it in 30 days.
Right.
It takes longer.
Do you think foreclosures are a good opportunity for someone? Because that's the people that come to us are saying, "Oh, I can get a deal. I can get a foreclosure."
I think in the past they may have been more of an opportunity. I think right now, because inventory is so tight, that a lot of contractors can come in. They can, there's no urgency. They have a place to live. They have a home somewhere else, and they're buying it strictly to purchase it at the right price, be able to put some money into it, and then flip it. Meaning, take it, fix it up, and sell it again. And so they can wait it out versus a first time home buyer who, number one, hasn't had any experience. This can be it's going to be a rocky road. It's not going to be an easy one. I have a client right now who's still working on it's not even a foreclosure. It's a short sale. And it's been over a year because of title issues on the property.
I think that watching your time frames is important. If you need to get into a place in 3 months, may not happen. And having you mentioned the team earlier of the attorney, mortgage person, real estate person. You got to have people that are in the game with you. Otherwise, the game will get out of your reach. Brad, if someone wants to reach you to further this discussion about the happy topic of foreclosures.
The best way to reach me, Gary, is via my cell phone, which is 978-375-5531, or they can reach me via email at brad@bradavergon.com. And Gary, how do they reach you?
I can be reached at 508-733-6005 or Gary@MoveWithGary. Well, Brad, not to start the new year out on a down note, I think it's important to talk about what foreclosures represent to people as opportunities as they sit and say, I want to find a house. What do I do? And
Exactly.
So I appreciate you taking your time today to do that with us.
Happy to do it, Gary.
Once again, thank you for watching All Things Real Estate. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Brad or Gary.